Hi, I'm attorney Renee Osipov, and I assist parents, guardians, and students who are having issues surrounding 504 plans and the accommodations within them. In this video, I'm discussing how to write a 504 plan with someone who has anxiety. So we can first start with 504 plans are actually codified in federal statutes. And so in those statutes, there are requirements of what has to actually be included in the 504 plan. So first, for someone who has anxiety in general, to be granted a 504 plan or to qualify for it, the federal law states that an individual must have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits a major life activity. So if we're talking with anxiety, that would be the mental impairment. And typically this has to be diagnosed by some type of healthcare provider. It could be a pediatrician, could be psychologist, psychiatrist, or even a behavioral therapist. But there has to likely be a diagnosis of anxiety. So that would satisfy the first part of that requirement. That would be the mental impairment. And then substantially limits a major life activity. So this is anything within the school facility, really, that is a substantial impairment. So this might mean taking tests. This might mean transitioning between classes. This could just mean self-regulating within the classroom, right, with emotions and anxiety and all of that. So all of that would be covered under the requirements to be granted a 504 plan. So once that happens, then the school would likely come together with the 504 plan coordinator and the team, which also includes parents or guardians, depending on the age of the student, but the student may be involved in this meeting as well. The general education teacher, or if there's many for different subject areas as students get older, they would be included in the team as well, and then likely some sort of admin from the school. It could be principal, superintendent, vice principal, something like that. So when the team comes together, that's when the actual writing of the 504 plan takes place. So if someone or student has a diagnosis of anxiety, then first what has to be written into the 504 plan is the diagnosis and the observations and data collected by other educators within the school. So what this might look like are teachers stating that when tests are given, a student becomes anxious and maybe has difficulty finishing the exam on time, has anxiety attack, or lists sort of the symptoms. So it does need to be written, though, in the observations that not all educators, at least one of them, were to see some type or show data that there's some type of substantial impairment and what's that surrounding. So again, I gave the example when a test or exam is given, but a teacher could also observe when the student is transitioning between classes, they're agitated, they appear very nervous, things like that. Those are all observations, but that needs to be included. It has to be written in the 504 plan. Then there may be goals written in as well, and also the accommodations, which are really the most important part, and how they're written. So from what I have seen with clients, I think the biggest mistake made when writing accommodations is that they're too generalized or there's not enough detail. So you want to write those accommodations so that any educator, any staff member within the whole school were to pick up the 504 plan, they could read the accommodations and they would know exactly how to comply with them. So an example of a poorly written accommodation would be student is allowed extra time when exams are given. Well, how much extra time? Are we taking this literally that the student may have as much time as possible? They could literally sit there all day, because that's extra time, to finish their exam. It's hard to know. And one educator may say, well, extra time is just double. Another educator may say, well, that's time and a half. So that's a poorly written accommodation. And this leads to a lot of stress and anxiety, more anxiety around the student because they don't know what to expect. Correctly, I would say, in my opinion, or better way to write an accommodation would be when exam is given, student is allowed time and a half from whatever the other requirements are of the students to complete the exam. So then we know that, if the other students are given an hour, our student with the 504 plan gets time and a half. And so every educator who looks at that 504 plan, including a substitute who walks in that day, can know, okay, that student gets time and a half. And so it's easy to implement. The other thing you want to think about when you're writing accommodations for someone with a diagnosis with anxiety is, what is the actual root of the anxiety within the classroom? Is it transitions? So if it's going in between classes, maybe they need to be given time ahead, or they maybe leave the classroom before the other students and they can transition quietly by themselves without a bunch of other people in the hallway, which is causing them anxiety. If that's the case, the student doesn't need extra time on exams because that's not where the anxiety is coming from, right? It's the transition in the hallway. So you really need to get to the root of what's causing the anxiety. Another thing you want to think about too is, especially if students are older, it's sometimes good to have them sort of advocate for themselves when they need those accommodations. So one way to do this is the student may give the educator a sort of secret signal. So it could be slipping them a piece of paper. It could be holding 2 fingers up or giving them a thumbs up to clue the teacher in. And then that student may leave the classroom to go to the office, the nurse, to self-regulate or to get the medication that they need. And so they're allowed to self-advocate for themselves, and that teacher must grant them that accommodation when they do that. So these are just some examples, but I think, again, the biggest thing that you want to include when writing a 504 plan with someone with anxiety is, one, the observations that are included in the 504 plan need to clearly state that there is a substantial impairment, whatever that may be within the school. It needs to be written and it needs to be clear. The second thing to remember when writing the accommodations, you need to figure out what is actually causing the anxiety and tailor the accommodations for that. And also make them very clear so that anybody who picks up that 504 plan would know exactly how to implement those accommodations. If you have any more questions or you'd like more information, you can check out our website, our contact information. It's all linked below this video. Thanks.